Who is the richest man in the world? Remarkably, there are some who say it may be this man, Mobutu Sese Seko. In 1965, the CIA helped him become the president of the Central African country called Zaire, formerly the Congo. His immense personal wealth, say his critics, is paradoxically about equal to his country's huge foreign debt, and that is a sum of some $5 billion. While most of Zaire's 30 million people are desperately poor, many of them starving, their country has huge reserves of cobalt, copper, and diamonds. This son of an army cook, himself a former army sergeant, is today very much the dictator of Zaire and a staunch ally of the United States. Since the days of President Nixon, Mobutu has been an honored guest at the White House. Why? Because of the importance of Zaire, but also because Mobutu, like the Shah, like Somoza, advertises himself as a fervent anti-communist.
Who's been a faithful friend of the United States for some 20 years.
But a man who knows Mobutu and his financial dealings at first hand has a different insight into Zaire's president. Intelligent?
Without any doubt.
A good leader?
For his pockets and the pockets of his clique, yes, but not for the people. Certainly not. It's awful.
A thief?
Yes, yes.
Erwin Blumenthal was for a year Director General of the Bank of Zaire, serving there as watchdog for the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which has consistently reported on the corruption of Mobutu's regime. How wealthy a man is President Mobutu?
It must be enormous.
Let's say $3 billion.
Yeah, that I would agree to. That would be the minimum.
And perhaps as much as $5 billion, which he himself controls.
Yeah, under his sole control.
Which makes him undoubtedly one of the wealthiest men in the world.
There's no doubt about it, sure.
Of course, no one really knows the extent of Mobutu's wealth, but no one denies it is huge. We took a look at some evidence of his fortune in Belgium, where the president and his kin have bought up 11 choice properties. Some of them are lived in by members of his family, some are rented. This is the one that he lives in a Brussels suburb. The property itself is worth $2 million. The furniture inside said to be worth $1 million. At that point, several Zaireans crossed the street to block the camera and demand the videotape cassette. They didn't like reporters prying into their president's affairs. We pointed out we were on public property, but they just grabbed our equipment and made off with it back into the grounds of the chateau. Finally, we called on the Brussels police and got our equipment back. But as a result of this affair, the government of Zaire refused our request to film in their country. Instead, producer Barry Lando traveled there with an inconspicuous camera. We also purchased footage from other sources, including an interview with Mobutu by a reporter from French television.
Because I've got a few homes, that's supposed to be a fortune. People say anything at all. Since I came to power, the budget of the Republic has always been an open book.
Not so. The budget of the Republic has never been an open book. One person, though, who does know something about it is Nguza Carliban, who, a few years back, served as foreign minister and prime minister to Mobutu. Today, he lives in comfortable, self-imposed exile in Belgium. His aim, he says frankly, is to replace Mobutu.
In the 8 months I was prime minister, he has taken from the National Bank 1 billion Belgian franc, which is roughly 35 at that time. At that time, it was $35 million.
A few years back, it could never happen today, some opposition deputies were able to piece together a report from government documents claiming to show how Mobutu's family and friends were ransacking the country's treasure. One of them, who according to this report profited most, was the president's Uncle Lito, who got the equivalent of about $35 million in 1 year. And there were lots of others, with their individual yearly takes running to hundreds of thousands of Belgian francs apiece.
It's all family, it's a large family.
Mobutu is also a big spender. On one occasion, he donned a cowboy hat, chartered the Concorde, and invited 100 friends to visit Disney World with him. Cost of the trip, $2 million. One of the sources of Mobutu's huge wealth has been his country's minerals. Do I understand that cobalt, diamonds, and so forth are sent directly to Europe on chartered aircraft, and this is money that goes into his account without ever going into government accounts?
This is one of the techniques.
Another technique Mobutu has used to line his pockets, according to his critics, has been to encourage foreign powers, foreign companies, foreign banks to finance huge projects for Zaire. Example, a $100 million TV radio complex, the voice of Zaire. Too big and sophisticated for the country. Today, most of its equipment doesn't even work. The former prime minister says he knows who really benefited from the project.
The French made money, and those who were bribed.
Those who were bribed?
Because 5 or 10% of it went into those who negotiated, the official, Zairian official who negotiated the project.
The French also made millions from this World Trade Center in downtown Kinshasa, packed with the latest technology. But the air conditioning system doesn't work, so almost all the tenants have moved out.
Useless. Can you imagine? I could understand that Japan or United States or France use a World Trade Center because they need to have international communication for trade. Zaire.
The list continues. A half-mile-long bridge built by the Japanese, inaugurated with a celebration to match its size. But the port it was supposed to serve and the railroad it was designed to carry are years away from being built. The Italians sold Zaire a sophisticated steel mill that doesn't churn out a ton of steel today. But the biggest white elephant of all is the huge Inga hydroelectric complex and transmission line, which cost more than $1 billion and today operates at only 20% of capacity. $400 million of that cost was guaranteed by the U.S. Export-Import Bank. How do Mobutu and his cronies benefit from many such projects? They are said to exact a fee of between 5 and 10% on such undertakings. That is traditional in tribal Africa. But Erwin Blumenthal says Mobutu and his clique are greedier than that.
If Mobutu and his clique would stay to 5 to 10%, okay, but no.
It's much bigger than that.
You can say that again.
When all of these projects were undertaken, copper prices high, cobalt prices high, diamonds in good shape. So it was understandable that businessmen from the West would say, hey, here's Bonanza. We can make some money and we can build a showcase in the center of Black Africa.
You've got it, exactly.
And unfortunately, copper went down, cobalt went down, diamonds went down. So somebody made a bad guess.
That was the West, the Western banks, and that's their problem now. Zaire has more than 5 billion debt. Zaire cannot repay it because of the situation inside the country. Banks, and that's their problem now. Zaire has more than 5 billion debt. Zaire cannot repay it because of the situation inside the country.
Mobutu has also run into the ground many once prosperous businesses that had been owned by foreigners, but which he nationalized and then turned over to family and friends. His Uncle Lito, for instance, was given his food importing firm. Today it no longer operates. Inside it looks like a junkyard. But Uncle Lito did not go broke. Among his many assets, this handsome villa on the outskirts of Brussels. U.S. Congressman Howard Volpe is chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa.
The economy is falling apart. There have been so many investments that have not made a contribution, that have diverted resources away from activities that would have really helped to develop the agricultural sector, to sustain the economy, feed the population.
Example, just a short distance from Zaire's $100 million television complex is Mamayemo Hospital. Once one of the best hospitals in Black Africa, today its equipment is broken down, flies swarm over garbage in the courtyard. The hospital is simply unable to provide many of the most basic services. The rate of child mortality here and throughout Zaire is staggering.
You should see the people. They are really starving slowly to death. Once it was so rich that they, in agriculture, they exported grain. Today they are waiting for the help from the United States so that people can survive.
Everything that is said that is written in the press is done to destabilize us, to run us down. You know the history of Zaire since its beginning. We became independent under impossible conditions. There were not even 5 university graduates when the country became independent. And for 5.5, almost 6 years, there was chaos and anarchy. And today, the same people who did not prepare Zaire for its independence are now the first to criticize, to say anything at all.
He has built this country into a country. There wasn't any such thing in the minds of any Zairean or Congolese.
Sheldon Vance was U.S. ambassador to Zaire from 1969 to 1974.
He had to deal with a situation where his people still had no sense of a nation. The traditions of leadership were the traditions of tribal leadership. His goal has been, and I think to a considerable extent he has succeeded, to become the tribal chief of the whole country.
It all belongs to him effectively.
It all belongs to him effectively. And the difference between the privy and the public purse is a difference that is very difficult for them to seize and understand.
So it's not corruption as we know it, it's the way the game is played.
It's the way the game is played, exactly.
Zaire belongs to him.
There you are, because Zaire doesn't belong to him. Zaire belongs to all the 30 million Zairians.
You're painting a picture of a rather benign patron, tribal chief.
Who's a tough guy, too.
Tough in what sense?
He's tough in insisting on recognition of his leadership role. There can only be one leader, says he, in a tribe or a country.
And if you decide that you're going to be opposition, loyal or otherwise,
you run into trouble.
Case in point, last year, 12 Zairean legislators, opponents of Mobutu, went to the Intercontinental Hotel in Kinshasa to meet with some visiting U.S. congressmen, including Mickey Leland of Texas.
They wanted to form an opposition party, which constitutionally, by the way, is illegal in Zaire.
Afterwards, Congressman Leland happened to be watching from the hotel entrance as the opposition deputies left. The deputies were set upon by plainclothes police.
One guy had been thrown to the ground, as I said, by his tie. And several people were just kicking him and stomping him while he was bleeding profusely from his forehead. And I just saw blood going everywhere. Had I interfered, I probably would have been killed.
What about the attitude, what about the actions of the U.S. Embassy in Zaire?
They tried to gloss over what we had seen there. And their representation to us was that this happens all the time, so don't be so concerned, that this is nothing compared to what used to happen, that kind of thing.
Why is he important to the United States? Why do we pay this kind of attention? Why is he our ally?
He's been a reasonably successful leader of one of the most important countries in black Africa.
And anti-communism.
And anti-communist.
And if he's a Somoza or if he's a Shah?
They're better than Khomeinis.
What would happen if IMF, World Bank, U.S. banks suddenly said, enough. Enough Zaire. Enough Mobutu. We're through.
People would finally, they would die in that country. It would be a revolution. It would be a bath in blood. They cannot stop now.
At some point, President Mobutu will not be there. The question we need to ask ourselves in terms of our long-term interest in Zaire, and Zaire is an important country, is how will the rest of the population respond to the United States subsequently? Are we going to create a self-fulfilling prophecy in which we will effectively be creating a hostile regime, hostile to American interest in the long term? I don't want to see that happen. I don't think Americans want to see that happen.
The people are starving now. The misery of the people will be the best argument, not only against Mobutu, but also against Mobutu's ally, because the perception of the people is that the Mobutu's ally are accomplices for their misery and their starvation. And what will happen? The wild revolution or wild revolt will be something against Mobutu, but also against the West.
He's been there a long time.
That's right. That was the case of Amin, more than 10 years. That was the case of Bokassa, more than 10 years. they all finish the same way: exile, prison, or death.
Listen, it's not power for power's sake, but the love that I have for my people, this attachment. As we have the habit of saying in Zaire, it is a complicity that exists between the people and the chief. It is not power for power's sake, but I like to rule. Why try to hide it? I like to rule.